can
Yeah.
record. We're recording.
Perfect. Then I will call the meeting to order, and we'll start with a roll call. McKee here, Nichols,
Here.
Schultz,
Here.
there he is, Thomas.
Here.
Alrighty, perfect. Then we are just gonna get right into the discussion. And Brad, I'll send it your way for the conversation on staff planning and compensation philosophy.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. And Jessica's going to pull up the slides, but we're kind of doing dual purpose today with this work session from our goal setting and action steps from back in March. Bigger picture, we talked about scheduling work sessions to focus on, important items that maybe weren't urgent or reactionary. And this is kind of the first of all those that we're doing. And second, of course, is to check the box regarding staff planning as well as compensation. So I just have a couple of slides to go through. I was able to talk to a couple of you to answer questions beforehand. And really the most time is allocated just for answering questions from the City Council and talking about next steps. So this first slide, all this is the organizational chart that was in your packet, showing some of the changes that staff is looking at for 2021 and 2022. And the next couple of slides really just dive into each department. So Jess, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So this is the administration department, although I'm off to the side a little bit, technically in the administration department as well. And what's represented in red is really the changes we see over the next 20 months or so. Starting at the top with the admin services director position, that's Jessica Feisey. Really a substantial update to our job description, reflecting the duties of that job. Especially with taking on the extra finance stuff and moving the IT contract actually under Jessica as well. Currently that's under myself. And really the IT contract would stay the same. It's only in red because it denotes really the move in the organization from under myself over to Jessica. Kind of bouncing back up. Also in the plan for some time has been to try to enhance our work through the use of maybe someone who's wanting to get in the field. So it's dual purpose, and I'm talking about the intern position. So finding somebody who maybe wants to get into city administration or government in general, who has the skill set or the education or both, it can help with some special projects at a pretty affordable manner. You're not talking about benefits typically, you're talking about purely a wage, and whether that's 6 months, 20 hours a week or full-time for a summer. I think it's pretty open-ended, but I think that'd be something that would be beneficial to the city. And I know the mayor's brought that up with me as well. So it feels like it's a win-win between the staff goals as the council as well. The finance manager, that position is on the agenda this evening. That's a significant need in the organization. Right now we have the accountant position and then Jessica and myself. And with utility billing increasing, as well as just general accountant activities and Jessica's role really ballooning from HR to everything else going on. We need somebody to take some of those responsibilities. So that's on the agenda tonight. And then below that, we envision some sort of part-time utility billing to come off of the accountant position to keep that not to be too full. So I guess I'll maybe pause there with the administration department. One more note, the part-time utility billing, that would be actually funded by the water and sewer utility. That would not be a general fund expenditure.
And to refresh me, Brad, I believe the finance manager, most of the funding for that would be coming from existing contract fees. Is that correct?
So within the 2021 budget, we put $75,000 in there thinking we would use a contract, correct? So we were thinking or enhancing either with Northland Securities or AEM, KDV or somebody to come in, 1 or 2 days a week. And my estimate right now is if we can get this person started, call it July 1st, half a year, with extra costs, assuming family coverage and health insurance, kind of the worst case scenario with all payments that we'd be closer to probably 55,000 for this year. So we have, $20,000 under budget for that service assistance.
Very good. Is that funding that we would normally have every year, that's 75 or so, where we're going to actually realize some savings longer term by bringing this in?
No, I mean, for 20, if you kind of allocate that, if it's $55,000 for half a year, it's probably 110 for a full year. So we certainly would have to levy another $40,000 to cover this compared to 2021 for 2022 for a full year of that position. So there would be some extra costs levied for that. Now, the 75,000, we have that moving forward without a levy increase. So it's not like we have to have the whole 110 increase next year. It's just the gap.
Okay. And we'd be getting more hours than we would be getting from the consultant. Is that right?
Significantly, Mayor and Council, the 75,000 number came from Dayton, and they were getting 1 day a week in the office, as well as like another half day of just bonus time answering questions. So 40 hours a week instead of 12.
Excellent. Okay, that's great.
Yeah. Manoj or Alan have anything to add to that, or any questions?
No, so Brad, one quick question just from reading this this org chart, right? So this is not, I mean, it's the way I look at it, or maybe if I'm reading it wrong, you can correct me. This is a mix of functions. Each of these boxes is not essentially a person, right? So like elections is not one person, it's a function that rolls up into the deputy clerk. Is that right?
Correct. And we struggle with this org chart a lot. The only reason elections really is on there because there is a staffing component to it with all the election judges. There's all sorts of functions that are not on this org chart whatsoever that each person does as part of their job. So it's kind of a hybrid of what goes on and what's not. This is really a people-oriented org chart, not a function org chart.
And I would,
which is why the elections is kind of, so if I just look at this, right, I'm trying to make a count of, hey, what do we have on as the administrative staff today, and what are we looking to, potentially get guidance on changing it to, right? So the from and to is what I'm trying to get at. So what would be a good count? So if I look at the administrative assistant, the deputy clerk, like, what's the count today, and what do you want, like, ideally to get to?
Well, sorry, let me make sure I'm understanding this. From a functional standpoint or a staffing standpoint, are you referring?
Staffing standpoint.
So this would be it for within 2 years. We'd still would be by the end of 2022. We still would want to enhance this to a 2025 plan, which is really the action step, but we wanted to really focus on the next 20 months short end. So really with the administrative assistant piece, that position would not change. The deputy clerk position there's probably a potential tweak to the job description for that, depending on what has to fall off of Jessica's plate. But really the red items are the changes that I would envision certainly happening.
Right. I mean, I think that's why I'm like a little lost trying to read this. Okay, maybe I'm in a unique position compared to everybody else's. So which of these positions, I'm talking about staff, exists today, right? Elections, we don't have somebody for that box, right?
well,
Sorry.
I would just note that we do have about 30 election judges who work for us on a biannual basis, and we do hire them. So but just per election. So that's part of the reason that's on here is we do hire staff related to that.
So is it a fair statement saying that it's worth one person's effort over a year normalized? That when we have these election judges come on and we have to hire them during a peak time, if I normalize it toward during the year from budgeting standpoint, it's one resource, right? Is that a fair statement?
That's a great question. We have about 30 election judges who work for 5 days a year.
And are they volunteers, Jessica?
They are paid. We do pay them just minimum wage. So every time the minimum wage increases, that goes up. But we do pay them.
We budget them in the election years only, though, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So can I ask? I just want to.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I
Go
just
ahead,
want to piggyback off Manoj's question. So, if I understand this right, red is where you want to get to, black is where you're currently at. Is that correct?
It is, and to answer Councilmember Thomas's question, I apologize, I didn't understand it. The additional positions of this would be the intern, the finance manager, and the part-time utility billing. admin services director is Jessica right now. IT contract exists right now as well. So
Okay. Those probably should have been black then to be more clear.
yeah, it just represents the change to the job description.
Oh,
I don't know if you
okay.
can see this. It looks to me like you're adding 1.3 that are funded by the general fund, 0.5 that are funded by the utility fees, and the rest are status quo. Is that right?
Correct, other than the job description changes likely has a compensation component as well.
Sounds good.
But when you're talking in FTEs, it doesn't really equate either because each of these FTEs are on a different pay scale.
Yep, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get an idea of the scale, right, on what we're trying to do. And so the elections kind of make sense to me. Like, I understand that minimum wage is 30 weeks a year, so roughly give 0.6 FTEs, right, irrespective of the pay scale you're at. So, and that's during the election year, but, give or take. I think every 2 years something is going to come up. For the accountant, did we have a dedicated position there? Is that a function being played today?
For which position?
The accountant.
Joe's,
The accountant position, we do
Going
have,
black.
Oh,
yep, we do have a staff
It's
member
a
in that role.
full-time, or rather I should have rephrased it. It's a full-time
Yes,
accountant
it's-
position. It's like, okay.
It is a full-time position. Just at the moment has so many responsibilities that the finance manager should hopefully take, be able to do that higher level stuff and let them get back to more manageable workload.
Okay, that's all I had. I just wanted to make sure I'm reading this right. Thanks.
Sounds good. Anyone else have anything? Any questions? Otherwise, I'll hand it back to Brad.
Right, we'll shift over to the right. I believe we're in Public Works now. And I'll try to describe this again a little bit in detail. So starting with the top, Public Works Director, Engineer, that's Kevin Matson. Right now it's Public Works Director. I envision we need a job description update for Kevin. So really that's all that is. That's not a new position or anything. That's a job description update. A new position would be an administrative assistant for the Public Works Department. And that's really a hybrid position. We envision that to do probably 60+% assistance with building inspections and probably 40% more with administrative duties for the Public Works Department. It's just getting busier and busier. We also envision adding a new position as utility superintendent or operator or something. And this would be the position that would oversee the new, well systems and utilities for the city. This would only take place if the city pulls the trigger, on that $7-8 million project to have our own water system. We need an expert in that area. The maintenance supervisor position, that's a job description change. So right now we have a crew leader position. The maintenance supervisor would allow for more direction to employees and really think what that position is really doing. It would take some of that supervisory work off the Public Works superintendent so they could focus on needed areas. And then as far as the maintenance worker, that's it'd go from 4 FTE to 5 FTE. And that's actually a this year budget, 2021. That'll come before you on April 22nd. So as far as new positions, you're talking about one for the maintenance worker, one for the administrative assistant on the general fund, and then one on the utility fund, and then as well as a job description update for the Public Works Director. So three new positions.
Gotcha.
Brad, I'm sorry, I missed a little bit when you were talking about the administrative assistant and how they would support building inspections. Would that person actually be involved in inspections or just coordinating?
Coordinating.
Okay.
And this ties in really with the administration department. So right now, Shauna, our admin assistant for the admin department, about 60+% of her job actually is managing the building permit process, which means where we've lost 60% of a administrative assistant for the admin department. So by moving this over, it actually gives a 0.6 FTE boost to the admin department by shifting this over to the public works department.
So even with this person dealing with building permit stuff, we still don't have anybody. I mean, Metro West Metro or Metro West, I can't remember they actually just do inspections based for code, right? They don't look at inspections for PUD compliance or anything like that.
They're correct. They're specifically building permits, and they also function as our fire marshal as well.
Okay, so, but we don't have anybody that fills that void at the back end to basically close the loop, so we make sure we don't have what happened with Lennar and Ravinia, where they're not building homes to actual approved PUD standards.
We do now with Mike going to the construction services coordinator role.
Okay,
So that was a gap that existed that we, tried to fix and just didn't quite do it in time. With Mike being the construction services coordinator, we believe we had that gap filled.
okay, all right. My only suggestion on when you do these org charts in the future is you put below what they are. Like the colors are going to get lost in translation in future. To say if it's an ad, ad would be one ad under instead of 5 FTEs, it'd be 1 FTE ad, and then maintenance supervisor is just a job description change or whatever, so that when somebody picks this up 6 months down the line and doesn't know the background on this chart, they're not going to think, my God, they're adding all these people.
Yeah,
So I appreciate that. I tried to do it in the narrative, but I agree that they'll be separated. It was just really hard when I started adding everything in these little boxes to see anything. So probably need a better org chart versus basic Word document.
Yeah.
I suggest Visio. It always works well for me.
I appreciate that.
all righty.
Okay.
And we can move on to public safety then, Jessica. So I'll try to walk through this again. So obviously as Matt is our director of public safety. Below him, we have an office manager position. That is a title change. Currently we have Paula as administrative assistant. She does well more than that, and now she actually has staff underneath her. So we envision that changing to an office manager title, which will have a job description change and some compensation as well. The administrative assistant position below that right now is a part-time position that we envision moving to a full-time position. So Matt, is that 0.75 FTE right now?
Yeah, Amy is 29 hours a week currently.
So picture that being, 0.25 FTE. Obviously, there's also costs with making someone full-time with health insurance and other benefits. Matt, with community service officer, what's that at for FTE right now?
We're at basically 30 hours a week right now, split between, whatever number of part-time people is appropriate. So it's an addition of 10 hours.
So similar again, thanks, Matt. So similar again, and that could be between two positions that still might remain part-time positions, or it potentially could be a full-time if we chose to go that route. But that'd be a future decision point. And then finally with the sergeant, this would be adding, going from 1 sergeant to 2 sergeants to finalize that plan to get some buffer between Matt having to deal with every single call after hours, having some after hours supervision. I will note that in our current staffing plan, that's a 2022 hire. We've been talking internally about the potential for bringing that forward quicker this year, just based upon the needs in the organization. And if we can swing it financially to do so, it really would be beneficial. But Matt and I need to flesh that out and present it to you with how we're going to get it done. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Sounds good.
One note, Councilmember Nichols asked this, and it was a really good point, but I didn't highlight maybe enough. This is contingent also upon the further review of planning and engineering. So if we choose to go more internally with either of those items, that will alter this org chart as well. I just left that for a further study. Similarly, with fire, if we choose to go through a duty crew and whether that creates a staffing need, you know, we obviously have some work to do to make decisions that will impact this org chart as well. This is really kind of a just moving forward without any different direction.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and we'll get more clarity on the fire service stuff as we get that work plan kind of fleshed out. And under the category of you guys talked about earlier, emergency management is another kind of one of those significant job functions, but doesn't have specific separate people all the time dedicated to it. So it's kind of another one of those invisible boxes on the chart.
Brad, this is Manoj. You had a question. So not specific to this one, but across the three we reviewed, right? Do we have so I'm looking for something like what justifies the change, right? In a sense, we know we are overworked. So that's not the equation here, right? But how do we justify, do we add 1 versus 3? So if you look at the last 2 years and the current year, right? So let's take the night calls that we refer to with Matt, right? Where a couple of sergeants would definitely help there, running around the clock. Some of it might be availability, so I know that you might not be able to justify that with work packets. But across the board, when we add maintenance workers and things like that, is there a way for us to look at, hey, this is what we saw in 2019, this is what we saw in 2020, and this is what we anticipate in 21, 22, and this is why we need to incrementally start adding people over the next 20 months, right? To make sure that our heads above water and we do good job, right? Good quality work. It's not just staying above water, but at least that justification with respect to what are we seeing with respect to work coming in and how we're handling it. Do we have that with respect to these recommendations?
Somewhat. So a couple of years back, the biggest initiative we did at the department head level, and this was presented to the council at the time, we came forward with a 2025 all the way through 2040 kind of staff plan and had some assumptions. So let's assume this pace of growth, adding this amount of roads, adding this amount of parks, and under these assumptions, what staff would be necessary to really continue the basic services we provide, not even expanding services. So what we do at the staff level is we have a check-in with where we're at as compared to that. And essentially where we're at is growth has far outpaced that plan. So we have an annual check-in where we're looking at workload as well as financial ability to take on these positions. Ideally, we'd have had most of these positions a couple of years ago. However, the budgets didn't allow for it. So we've actually been suppressing this. But as far as, significant data points, we'd have to bring that back. I mean, we'd have to do, I suppose, studies of work. I'd have to, I could certainly have time studies for who's doing what, but I really rely on the leadership team, Kevin, Jessica, Matt, and then me questioning every recommendation of what they need to accomplish the goals of the city council.
Right. I think it's more about qualitatively. I think we all are on the same page, right? I think we all understand that, the city has grown, the workers increased, right? Residents have increased. So if you look at public safety, there's tons more to do, right? So I think directionally, I don't think we have an issue here. It's more about the scale, right? Quantitatively, we still need to have that data to supplement our understanding and our experience. I think the leaders in each of the departments are absolutely on top of the need, but when we start looking at budgets and adding expenses, we want to make sure that we appropriately staff it. So maybe we need more than what you're asking, right? We go back and we say, you know what, Matt's dealing with 3 times the call volume from 2 years back, and he's like half the staff. So adding one person doesn't actually help anything. So then do we look at adding a couple of more people, right? So that's where I was going to get at, is all these recommendations, unless it's a new function, right? Finance manager, I get it, right? We know that that's a need. It's a bad slide to have this discussion on, but the sergeants, we know we need nighttime availability. So availability, new functions, I get it. We can't have quantitative data on, but anytime we're trying to look at scale, or splitting out functions from an existing person, it will be good to say that, hey, we used to get this many building permits that we used to handle. Now it's going way too much. So that the administrator, like, doubling up as a coordinator will really be help. It will be useful. So that would be something that I would request you to bring back, as we kind of finalize some of these.
Yes, absolutely. And that brings up a good point, Mayor and Council. We're not asking for any approvals tonight to hire any of these individuals other than the finance manager later on. We'd be bringing these back as part of the 2022 budget process, where we'd have further justification. And then ultimately, when we're ready to go hire this position, we'd have the job description and really that as much data as you can with some of these. And we're asking to, now we want this position to hire right now. So this really is that 30,000 foot level. And then we dig in further with the 2022 budget process. And then for sure at the hire. So I understand what you're saying.
And do you have a swag at what this will do to the budget, like from the general fund standpoint or levy standpoint? Like I know that you don't know the exact FT, you don't know the role description. I know that you don't have a high level compensation packages for these iron down, but based on your gut or what, when you put this together, is this overall 20% increase on overall comp structure for the team? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? Like, and I'm looking at a gut check, right? It's they're not signed, but at least based on what you're recommending, where do you think you're going to be at?
Yeah, I'd have to get back to you on that. What I will say is when we updated our financial management plan in 2021, we had a significant update. And prior to that year, we just put in a plug. Let's just say X $1,000 of new staffing. For 2021, we actually inputted our staffing plan. And it's actually an appendix as part of the financial management plan. So I think this is 1 or 2 FTE beyond what we thought would maybe be happening for 2022. I'll have to confirm that and follow up with it, but it's really in our plan within kind of the tax rate structure that we've sought out. So I can get back to you with the percentages, but it's per plan where we're at. Now on top of that, we got news, a couple of weeks ago, we had $98 million in new construction value last year as compared to 48 or 47 million the year before. So I think we have significant more tax base to spread it across, which will hopefully have a positive tax rate impact on the public. So I'm not really specifically answering questions other than it's in our plans, but I could get back to you on what the dollar increase would be.
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, it's about, I know there's going to be revenue coming in. I mean, the development that's happening, right, with the tax dollars and the assessments going in. It's also making sure that, hey, we had some plans about bringing in some in-house for functions in-house, which would give us the best bang for a buck, right? So it's having those discussions to make sure that we send it the right place, and especially when it comes to increments. Now, revising salary structures, revising role description, paying people what they're worth and for the work they're doing, absolutely, right? I think that is a different topic altogether. But when we look at increments, I want to make sure that we add in the right departments when we have surplus dollars coming in, as long as the tax rates are not going up. That's all from me.
Gotcha. Anyone else have anything? Otherwise, I agree with what you were saying, Manoj. I think once we have kind of some more of that data, when it's actual decision-making time at the budget process, I think makes sense. It'll be great to be able to dive into it a little deeper and get the specifics. But I'm following what you're saying, Brad, and it makes sense. So.
Well, if it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor, we can move on to a brief presentation on compensation.
Sounds good.
All right, Jessica, you want to advance the next slide, which I think deals with that? Yes. So if we want to hire these positions and keep the positions we have, obviously there needs to be discussion on attracting and retaining those employees we desire. And as I put in the report, I think it's in the report, but really, do we want minimum qualifications, just people who can do the job, up and comers, veterans, best and the brightest, etc. We need to think about who we're competing against in order to find these employees. Matt hasn't shared yet today, but we wanted to bring on an officer and make an offer tonight. And that person was swooped out underneath us to make a little more money with better benefits for a community smaller than us. So these, it's real out there for competing for employees. And then how do we develop a compensation plan to retain these employees as well? So this has been a struggle over time. This has been brought up to the council over time. And there hasn't, until yet, or maybe not even yet, really been a desire to really have a compensation philosophy or what we're trying to do here. We've just done incremental steps time over time, which is certainly one way to approach it. But anecdotally, and data that most of us know at the staff level, we've also been getting behind because of that. So we've been working on incremental changes to a city pay structure that is for a different city. When I got back here in 2013, we were kind of functioning more associated like a township style of government as compared to like a city. And now we're a vastly different city back in 2013. So I feel like we need to take a step at this and look at it. It involves, establishing a group who do we want to compare to, reviewing that information and seeing where we stand, establishing a philosophy where you want to be within that grouping, and then implementing those changes over time. I've had a couple of conversations with you. Knowing where we want to be doesn't mean we get there next year, but it gives us direction for where we want to go and how we make changes. So I guess I'll stop there. There's a lot that goes into a compensation philosophy. I talked about in the report. We certainly could hire somebody to do this work. We certainly, have the capacity to do some of it in-house as well. I want to make sure the council's comfortable. If the staff does it, you have to be willing to trust the data that we're giving to you. So if you're not able to do that or feel the public wouldn't do that, we'd recommend a consultant. So I guess I'll stop there.
Okay. Just kind of addressing that last point. I mean, to me, I guess it's going to depend to a certain extent on how much, a consultant would end up costing to do that. Generally, I think I'd have no trouble trusting staff with that. But externally, there might be a perception thing that where it's good to have another set of eyes looking at it. To me, it's going to come down to, is that a small amount or is that a very significant amount? And how much does that, extra set of eyes externally matter to us? But I'd be comfortable with either way, just dependent on what that number's going to end up being for a consultant.
Well, it'll have to come down to two is the information that's being pulled, is it publicly available that people can resource it and verify, because the general public will want to verify it as well,
Right.
But I do think we need to get a list of comparable cities, not only in size wise, but tax capacity. In our area, they might not be the same size, but we are competing with cities around us as well of different sizes. So we're going to need a breadth of information at all levels to get a good understanding where we're lacking, and then come up with some type of philosophy to get us where we want to be. Because we can't just do it overnight. There's no way we can just chop a 40% pay increase across the board. And
Can we talk about the vision and the level that we're searching for first, and then talk about how we would analyze comparable cities? Because I feel like the direction that we want to go and the end destination will shape who those comparable cities are.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Brett.
No, so Mayor and Council, yes. I mean, actually, the previous times I've brought this forward, my recommendation was to develop the philosophy first, and the vision for what we want to do, and then kind of see where that compares to other cities. But I've got shut down every time. Council have really wanted to see the numbers first, how we compare before developing the philosophy. So yes, you could do that.
I think from my perspective, it makes sense to figure out the destination first, because we can pull comparables to guide us anywhere depending upon the cities that we select. So I feel like the philosophy really helps us determine, is it appropriate to compare to Delano, or is it appropriate to compare to Medina, or is it appropriate to compare to and maybe all of those could be argued for depending on the scenario that we end up choosing to adopt.
Yeah, I would agree with doing it that way. That makes sense to me.
yeah, I mean, I guess you'd have to define what what you're trying to compare, right? Because I can't compare how we plow snow versus Medina plows snow to pay a heavy equipment operator. To me, they're doing the same job in that. So what are the things you're looking at that you're defining your division to be?
I was thinking more of the functions that require more experience and judgment. I think certainly, I guess you might call them routine city services are probably more comparable across cities. But when we look at the volume of construction that we're facing, the infrastructure we're putting in place, beginning water service and things like that, some of the comparable cities that we might choose to pick could have, pretty large bureaucracies around some of those things, or they could be entirely contract-based. But I think we just need to be careful what our target is going to be as we.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're coming back to the same with the comparable, right? You're comparing a water program of a certain size in various cities, right, with the population. Because ultimately, you're doing the same job. You're creating healthy drinking water, supplying it in a reliable fashion to the people in your town. I mean, a police officer in Corcoran should be really no different than a police officer in Plymouth and what their job functions are. But we're vastly different sized towns with different budgets. So in some respect, it's not going to vary very much in that regard.
I think Alan brings up a good point there, right? So yeah, a police officer in both the cities should not be any different. I think it goes back to what we can afford, right? I think that's what he's bringing to also on the size of the city. I think that comes back to, I think one of the lines that Brad had is, who are we competing against? Are we going to go head to head and Plymouth and fight for employees every time? We're going to lose every time, right? So we need to figure out who we are competing against and where our structure needs to be competitive. So that's one. And the other thing I wanted to call out was compensation schedules is just part of your overall talent management, right? And it's not just compensation. So I would like to look at defining your key personnel. Who are you? Who do you want to not lose or win every time, right? Versus the one I'm not saying any one employee is better than the other, but there are staff that you actually want to have around to run the city or manage the city. So just define your tiers and figure out where do you want to be ultra competitive, where do you want to be middle of the pack, and where you don't want to be on the top end of kind of spread our budgets around. That's one. And the other thing is, I would be really interested to look at how can we define a variable and base pay, right? Where, the base pay is good enough, but, we have, if we have a way to define, work variables with customer satisfaction, like how the city responds, 90% of the planning applications, so the planner dealing with that got very good reviews by the citizens. So can we look at those and see that, hey, that's what takes you above the edge, right? So if you are really good, if you want to keep our philosophy to be that I want to pay the best, then make sure that I have the best, right? Not that the best we could hire. So if you are doing that, let's do it right, and let's just have that variable and base pay component to it. Again, this goes back to defining philosophies and having an external, somebody else come in. I personally don't have a preference with respect to the staff doing it or a consultant doing it. It goes back to how much it will cost. But I'm pretty sure this council is going to kind of deliberate on each of those data points. So I don't think there is. I have a problem with being done internally if we can look at it objectively. That's just my thoughts around it.
Yeah, and some of that, there's different compensation patterns with a public entity versus a private entity. You could say you want to identify this plow truck driver as somebody you want to keep, and that plow truck driver does a good job, but this guy's on the higher end. But you can't really do that when you put people in a schedule format and they have to adhere to that format. I don't know how you do that. Maybe staff has some ideas and what other cities do, but it gets really tricky in that regard.
Yeah,
He might go back to the role. Go ahead, Brad.
Just to point out, that's exactly right. We have pay equity And we have to have a system that really a structure within you grade a job description based upon difficulty that pumps out a point or a grade level, and then you pay that where it's at on the line with difficulty. And certainly you can develop structures to reward certain things. You know, you can change job descriptions to match the qualifications. So for example, Jessica, Matt, Kevin, myself included actually, for our advanced education, we get 0 points awarded to our degree of difficulty because it's a desired qualification, not a minimum qualification. But we certainly could adjust the job descriptions to make that a minimum qualifications. Now, when Jessica, Matt, Kevin leaves, you might want to readjust that job description to make it desired, so you don't start paying that high again. But you know, there's certain ways you can get around that. There's longevity pay type things. I hate to have too complicated of a pay structure, but I think incentivizing what you want is important.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I'll touch on the easiest question we've discussed so far, and I would agree that it makes sense to me to, once we arrive at what our target is, you know, middle of the pack, above or below, with having that analysis be done by staff internally. If it takes, you know, 10 to 15,000 to do the compensation study, that's money we could put into the staff. So I feel like we'd be better off using those funds to achieve the target, as opposed to generating the data to justify and rationalize reaching the target. Now, I still think we need to kind of come to a consensus as to where we feel like we want to fit. So in my experience professionally working with compensation, I'm used to what they call a comp ratio target, where every company that I work for wants to be at sort of the 50% level in the middle of the comp range. So you can typically deviate up to 10% below or 10% above the midpoint without it being a big deal. And if you get, you know, farther below that or farther above that, then you start having to rationalize why you are in that position. And in my experience, that can lead to it can lead to a lot of issues, especially with high performers, because you don't really have a good mechanism to advance those people. I feel like from our perspective, when we look at the city's values that we put together at the beginning of the year, we talked about we want to have city government that's innovative, that's highly efficient and provides excellent service. I'm not sure what that means to each of you. In my perspective, what that looks like is either we're providing better quality service than comparable cities, or we're doing things at a lower cost, or both. And if we're able to do either or both of those things together, I feel like we're filling the vision. The question then is, can you do that at a veteran level higher, to the term that Brad has up on the slide, or does that require best and brightest? Does that require something different? And how the council feels about that, I think, is going to shape the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, I'm just kind of processing here for a second. I agree with what you're saying. Oops, sorry, I hit my mic. I agree with what you're saying, that's kind of an important question we answer first before we can really go forward with a lot of this.
I think my perception of how government typically seems to function. When you bring somebody in, they're kind of on a ratchet, right? So they continue to escalate cost of living. There's going to be a merit component potentially. Maybe they get promoted to a different role, but and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Brad, but it's hard if you hire somebody in at a role and they're a really high performer, it can be hard to get them to a higher level. So it creates an incentive once they get skills to jump ship. Is that true, or is that just a false perception that I have in my head?
No, I think that's true. With Corcoran, I think we're blessed where we're at, where we're growing so quickly that opportunities are taking place for employees. And ideally, we can keep the ones that we feel are just, crucial to organizational success. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we do this work because we believe in it. There's no doubt about it. But if you can make more money working for a different city, you're going to do that. So I think your perception is accurate. I mean, Jessica or Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just agree with Brad. You know, all of us in the public sector generally are here because we love what we do, and we're in some ways nerds and love that. But I think there's never a day that's the same, so that's exciting. But also looking at other cities and things like that, pay is always going to be part of the equation. But you know, here we're very lucky to have that opportunity to really shape a city. And so, I mean, I think that does offer, for if we're looking for up and comers, some really unique challenges. Over my 6 years, I've seen lots of change and got to be a part of a lot of different things. So I think that plays into it as well.
Yeah, and I would just kind of echo what both Brad and Jessica said, that obviously we're in this line of work because it's fulfilling. I mean, we want to serve, you know, I got into this role not just because I want to serve my communities, but also serve the people who are serving our communities. And that being said, is I think we all are invested in what the city of Corcoran has done and is doing over the past several years. But there's also recognition by other communities, and I can say with certainty that all of the members of the leadership team at some time or another have received calls from other cities asking if they're interested, or saying what's that competition look like. And when the job market is as it is, you're looking at not only opportunities but also the compensation matters, and where that ceiling is and what the future of your position looks like. And especially when you're talking about, for instance, in law enforcement, obviously finding a job that's fulfilling and meets all of our check boxes is partly what keeps you here, but that only lasts to a certain level. And when it has long-term implications, when you're talking about pensions or income, I mean, you're talking about a lifetime of change for not just you and your family. I mean, people are looking at what's doing right, and it's always a balance. And I think quality of your workplace plays a part of that, but I think compensation also plays a big part of that in being able to retain people. And I saw that with the person I tried to make a job offer to yesterday. It was I can't speak specifically all their details, but they went to work for a smaller community that simply paid better. And it's hard when you're at entry level, people without significant experience, and we're losing those candidates. And I think I've talked individually with most of you about how the job market has changed just dramatically over the past 3 to 5 years, and not just in law enforcement, but the public sector as a whole. But where we used to get, for law enforcement jobs, 100 or 200 people applying for a job, you get, now I think the last process we had 40, and probably about half of them had all been fired from their last jobs, and were probably people that we wouldn't even want to take a second look at. The other half that weren't had a long way to go, I think, before they would meet our community standards. And then the last handful that we vet, there's fierce competition. Most of them are in 2 or 3 processes, and unfortunately, it does come down to compensation.
I think when we look at the overall compensation philosophy, we have to look at the overall compensation package as well and put that in perspective. Because and it's hard because young people and new people to a job don't really look at the overall compensation package. They look at straight dollars in most cases. But how we compare an overall comp is very important, especially those people you want to retain long term.
Yeah, and I think that point's pretty well taken as well. And our Lakes area group, kind of along the Western Metro, from Rogers all the way down to the Lake Minnetonka area, the agencies do have a running, wage survey that does take into account health insurance, dental, and try and look at what does the big picture look like between agencies, and kind of compare and see where all the agencies land, and how that aligns with their city's philosophies.
Yeah, if we can get that for other departments as well, or something to that effect, that would be helpful.
Definitely.
But to Jeremy's question, I mean, you'd always want to get veterans if you could. It's just a matter of that's not always the case, right? So you may have to look at up and comers or best and brightest when you have somebody applying. But if we don't have comp that supports that, we're not going to get those people.
Certainly a lot harder. Yeah.
And from what I've been told, the past history is we always hire the, you know, fresh out of the gate, and we try to mold them and keep them. And, you know, fortunately we've had some luck in some areas, and some areas we haven't.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like at a bare minimum, I'd like to see us be at whatever the midpoint is for the cities that we elect to compare to. So if we're seeing that we're at the 70th percentile of the midpoint instead of the 90th, I think that's a problem. That's where we're at, but I always support getting certainly close to the midpoint and potentially above if we feel like we can end up delivering higher quality service for residents with still a good value. I don't want to see us paying above market and getting average outcome. I'm
Right.
above market if we get exceptional outcomes.
Right. And one thing to think about too is that our wage increases historically have been dictated by the union contract with the police union, right?
Mhm.
So the type of adjustment we make, is there going to be an expectation that those adjustments continue in the future when we go back to renegotiate the police union contract? So we need to be careful with that regards as well.
Yeah.
So even
Good
if you're
point.
doing a gradual step up over time, right, versus a one-time bump, how that's going to play into future negotiations could be difficult.
What I've seen typically a lot of cities do is they call that out as a wage adjustment as opposed to a cost of living adjustment. And so they get they'll even identify it as one-time wage adjustment, or, if there's a plan in place calling that out specifically, it's not uncommon to see that in contracts to say, part of a three-step wage adjustment is typically how they'll delineate that to really, as you said, call that out and call it what it is.
Okay.
I think my only call out still would be like something that Jeremy just touched on, and Alan kind of brought it out, is like I don't have any public sector experience when it comes to comm structures and what makes sense to retain the best. My experience is in the private sector, and my philosophy has always been pay the best for the best. As long as you have a way of measuring it and making sure they still remain the best, right? That the motivation is still where it is, and which is why I like the variable incentivized structures in pay scales. Now, how does that translate to a public sector job? I don't know. And that's where, maybe getting ideas back from you guys would be really useful. But I'm like, if we need good talent, we pay for it. We get good talent as long as they are efficient, they are effective, and we love them and the city loves them. And then as long as we have a way of measuring it and part of their comp is dictated on them continuing that level of performance, I'm happy to look at comp structures and increments to beat the market if we have to get the really good resources. But that's just the way my head works. But anything beyond that of, hey, we want to hire the best, so the comp structure goes high. So what happens if we do an increment when we still don't attract the best talent, but now we are paying at a higher level than we today are without much of an improvement in service quality. So that's where I get a little dicey with just saying we're going to try this. Going to increase and we're going to hope we get good talent versus, that's different when you're trying to retail. Like, I like Jessica, and I think Jessica should stay on forever. Yes, we will work on a package for her and figure that one out. But when you have an open role and we want to set the wage, I would love to see that it being tied to, incentives and performance metrics for the second half of it. So the 80%, they stay in that range of, hey, it's good enough, but then that's because you're just good enough. If you're really great, you have the chance to just peak out. But that's, again, a very private sector way of looking at it. I realize that. So, that's the way I think. And I'll just leave that with you guys and, when you go through this and how you want to structure this.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly jump in. I think that's the part where, we certainly could do this work initially internally. as far as establishing a mechanism and how that would play out with a grade system, that might be something where we'd engage a professional for to help us really, fine tune how to meet those goals. I hear what you're saying. Yes, there's certainly more difficult in the public sector when everyone's wage is public, and there's pay equity that doesn't exist in the private sector. But people have done it. People have found ways to have success. We might need some help with that part of it.
Okay, then how about this to start? Start the process internally, and when or if it gets to a point where you might need a consultant for certain things or just to complete the work or whatever, then you bring it back to us and we can make that decision at that time. Would that work?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, is that to staff or was that to your fellow council members?
To everyone actually, but directly to you.
Certainly, just how as far as that would look for me, I believe that would probably start with me working with the leadership team to come up with what we believe are good comparables. And before we do any digging of what those are, we'd want to get buy-in from you as a council of, yep, this is a good list to go get data from so we could study that. It's more difficult than you even mentioned today. Yes, some cities don't have certain positions. On top of that, a lot of cities don't have law enforcement. They contract it out. So we'll have missing data for some pieces, but then again, we're talking about a grade structure system. We can't essentially say police officer versus police officer and make that wage compete. We have to have the whole structure work out in pay equity format. So even if we are missing a gap on a couple of cities without law enforcement data, you would still have the whole structure overall.
Gotcha. Well, and then to everyone on the council, how do you feel about that process of starting internally and reviewing things as we need, and then reviewing if we need a consultant at a certain point?
I'm good with that plan.
I think it's logical progression.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. Like Brad said, I think we got to agree on the list of comparables first so they know what to work forward. So probably when you present that list, make sure you have enough detailed information about those comparables, their land size, population size, tax capacity, things like that, growth rates,
Yeah, the more you can throw at us, the better.
Right.
Perfect. Is there anything else you need from us, Brad, for now?
I think I'm pretty good. Matt or Jessica, is there any questions that I'm just missing that might be helpful for our direction, since I'm going to have you guys do a lot of the work with me?
No, I think.
Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry. The only thing you've talked about as you're talking about the wage and the compensation stuff about, bringing back data on, and I think any guidance that you might have on what data is meaningful to you, because it's always a combination of, like you mentioned, and there's always a combination of reasons for the position. So letting us know in your mind which data is meaningful for you helps us know which kind of data to look for.
Sounds good.
And then, as Brad mentioned, law enforcement, I'll throw out the caveat, law enforcement is always a challenge because every community is very unique in both their service expectations, but also their makeups. And, to your guys' point, we have to compare to equal or to similar cities as to what we're working towards. But at the same time, the cities that we're competing with, we don't have the budget of a Plymouth or a Maple Grove, but we still lose all of our people to them, or all of our candidates to them. So yeah, to our degree, they're not a one-to-one comparison, but they're obviously competition.
I think that's a good point, Matt. And if we have a pattern where we are seeing we're unable to attract the people that we want because they're repeatedly getting snatched by the same cities, even if that city is not necessarily apples to apples comparable on a city characteristic, there's still a competitive threat to the hiring function. And I think it would be appropriate to compare them on that basis.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I can tell you anecdotally everybody loses candidates pretty much to one ring inside. We haven't had our staff go directly to Plymouth or Maple Grove. We've done a good job, but we're we're growing, so we're trying to hire people. So we don't know which applicants we're not getting. But, you know, for instance, South Lake Minnetonka, they've lost, I think, 3 or 4 officers to the city of Minnetonka. And to some degree, you know, as smaller cities, we're not going to be able to compete with the bigger ones. But to that point, it's that blend of being the better place to work and paying just enough not to lose them, which, you know, so I think at that point, like we talked about, it fits somewhere in the constructs of the conversation.
I just call out that you know, be careful there, right? Because sometimes the size matters, right? It brings in budgets, and you can't go up. You know, again, I go back to my private experience, right? Like you can't always. I work for a smaller IT firm, and you can't go up against Google and Amazon and think you're going to win. And you don't want to set it up that way because after 3 years you're going to fold. So you know, while in short term will be a good win, long term, you know, you have tax rates that's going to start spiking. So I just keep that in mind. But if there are certain cities that are being, you know, where we are ending up losing quite a few battles, let's call that out an exception. And when we look at the data, we still want to be having our comparables right. Now, I also want to make sure that we don't look at cities from a size and makeup. I want to look at activity. So let's take the planning function, right? Anybody in the planning structure. Let's look at cities that are growing at our pace and try to beat them at that price, because we want good people for that. So Plymouth may not be growing anymore, right? They're pretty stagnant anymore. So maybe that's not a good comp for the planning function. We looked at, you know, elsewhere where there's a lot of planning activity versus, you know, for public safety, do we look at comparables where, you know, the cops have activity versus, you know, be one of the safest cities. So who do we compare against, right? So I don't think we should take one city and look at every function. Let's just look at functions and find a city that matches to our activity, and then figure out, okay, for that level of activity, we need this level of a resource, and this is the comp structure we need to be at. I know it's a little bit more nuanced in how we look at our comparable cities, but I would say that would be the best sense of you know, what's out there and what we should be paying for our staff.
I will just jump in, Mayor and Council. That's extremely difficult to do in the public sector with pay equity systems. You have to be on a gradient. So if your job is 200 degrees of difficulty, 400 degrees of difficulty, 600 points of difficulty, the compensation has to flow along that line to be legal. So I get what you're saying, and I'll try to see how we can nuance that out. But ultimately, it's a structure that we choose that we have to navigate to be in line with pay equity, which we have to report to the state every 3 years. So anything we would do, we would actually want to test that, which that also would be a likely consultant to help out with that, to test if our system meets pay equity, because we wouldn't want to implement any changes that would get us out of that. Especially with, for example, law enforcement or public works. Those are typically, you know, male-dominated fields. And if we paid extra in those fields, and then we're just fine with administrative jobs that are maybe typically more female, we would fail pay equity because we'd be paying male job functions at a higher level. So there's a lot to go along with it. With all that said, I get what you're saying, and we'll try to nuance that out.
Thank you.
Good.
Good. Do you have any idea what a feasibility study would look like, or comp study, for as far as cost goes?
I was trying to actually pull up, we actually hired Springstead back in, I think, 15. It was a very light study. Jessica, do you remember?
It was 2016, and I think it was about $10,000. Sorry, May of 2016, give or take a month.
Yeah, but you know, that I think what they did was parts that we can do. This is public data. The nuance of creating a new pay structure, that's where we would need assistance, and that can get significant depending how far we want to go. So for example, our pay structure right now is pretty truncated. You have your start step, your 6-month step, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're at the top. Which has typically been okay for us to attract some up and comers in the past anyway, because the starting wage it's fair. It was still probably a little below average, but it was pretty close. And then you could also kind of get to the top pretty quickly. Where we're at now, though, is, you know, from anecdotal, our top wage is not comparable to a lot of the cities that compete for talent. So, you know, whether it's adding to a 10-step system that then increases the overall top, there's just so many ways you can approach this.
Yeah.
That's where we need the help.
I'm just thinking of obviously staff time costs money too, right? So how much savings are we having staff do versus how much we're having an outside consultant do when staff may not be able to complete what the request is anyway. So
So are you thinking,
I'm thinking it'd be nice to get an idea of what an estimate would be from a couple different firms on, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you can get a request for proposal to do a study.
What we can do is I'll work with Jessica and we can just reach out to other cities who've got proposals recently and see what roughly they've been. So instead
Yeah,
of us doing the
that'd
work
be
of
great.
getting a proposal, we'll just ask around and see what people have paid.
Yeah, that's probably even a better start than actually looking from a comp list. At least we'll get an idea and then go from there.
right?
Yeah, and I just note for information that's available, the League of Minnesota Cities does put together an annual wage study, so we can work off of that data and then also reach out to the cities to ensure that their data that they have out there is correct. So we might have a starting point with some of those with the access that we do have to that database through the League of Minnesota Cities.
Gotcha.
Good.
Okay. Then I think we are all set, unless anyone has anything else to add.
Nope.
Then
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
We'll do a roll call vote. McKee, aye. Nichols,
Aye.
Schultz,
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Perfect. Thank you all, and I'll see you in about 23 minutes here.
Sounds
Bye
great.
now.
Perfect. See you guys.